baseball thing. We'll talk
There you
about
go.
it later. Tulsi served on the Homeland Security Committee, Foreign Affairs, and the Armed Services Committee during her tenure as a representative from the state of Hawaii. These are great fits for her. She's a wonderful unifying message for you this evening, and I couldn't be happier to be bringing another female veteran into our VFW. I'd like to introduce you to Congresswoman and Major Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming. I'm good. How are you? Nice to see you. Thank you so much. Nice to see you. How are you? Good. Nice to see you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming. Thank you for having us here.
Please give a hand for Hillary, please. She is the chaplain here for VFW Post 1679, and got to meet the vice commander back there, and just appreciate having this community of veterans that we can come and join and welcome us into such a beautiful venue. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's great to see some familiar faces. Great to welcome all of you who may be coming for the first time. I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight. I'll start out with a few thoughts. Earlier today in Manchester, we were at I guess it was a summit, a day-long summit hosted by an organization called No Labels. And the focus of this summit was around problem solving. Nonpartisan organization. They have folks who meet in Washington once a month, and really their main thing is, let's actually bring people together to solve problems. It's a novel concept these days, right? So it was I think there were over 1,000 people who came and showed up, people from all across New Hampshire, people all across party lines who are coming together and just saying, hey, let's stand together as Americans. We have different ideas on how to solve problems. We have different political affiliations. There are a lot of things that make us unique from one another, but really at our core, we stand together as fellow Americans who are interested in working for the well-being of our fellow Americans and for the interests of our country. It was a great conversation. They had a bunch of different speakers there. They had members of Congress there from both political parties. They had a few presidential candidates there from both political parties. And I think for me, it started out our day with exactly the right tone, because this is really the message that we've been bringing throughout our campaign, everywhere we go, is this message that I call about leading with Aloha. Leading with Aloha, you like that? What does that actually mean in a practical way? First of all, let's begin with Aloha. See, you can't say Aloha without smiling, so already our day is better, right? I get asked, and I got asked this a lot actually when I was at basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and I think I was the only female trainee there who was actually from Hawaii in that class. And so I was the girl from Hawaii, and I used to tell people Aloha all the time. They're like, what does it mean, Tulsi? Does it mean hello or goodbye? Make up your mind. You guys say it all the time. But it actually means so much more than that. There's a reason why we start our conversations with Aloha, why we bid farewell with Aloha, is because of this powerful meaning of the word, which the literal translation, alo, means to share, and ha is the breath of life that exists within every one of us. So when we greet each other with aloha, it's a powerful message, recognizing that we are all connected, that regardless of the color of our skin, where we come from, how we worship, if we worship, who we love, the way we live our lives, setting all of that aside, at our core, we see that we are all connected, that we are all brothers and sisters. We are all children of God. And setting that foundation, then we can treat each other with respect. We're inspired to actually listen to one another, to be able to communicate, have dialogue, bring our ideas together and say, okay, how can we solve this problem together? because that's what you do, right? With your family, with your friends, with those you love and those you care about. So leading with aloha is that reminder, living and leading with aloha is that reminder of who we all are together. And it takes us back to our Pledge of Allegiance. At a time when our country is so terribly divided along all of these different lines, right? Racial, ethnic, religious, political, partisan, all of these different lines. You have people standing in one corner with people who are like them, turning their backs on everyone else. One tribe against the other, one team against the other. When that's really undermining who we all are as Americans, the foundation that our country was built upon. Then when we recite this Pledge of Allegiance, what are we really saying? We're saying one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. These aren't just empty words. They actually mean something really powerful that are so important for us to remember at a time like this. At a time like this, when we are unfortunately so divided, let's come back and remember the values that this country was founded upon and what is required for us to strive towards that more perfect union. Recognizing that we have not achieved equality and justice for all, but we hope to. We are working in that direction, but we cannot accomplish that. We cannot solve the problems that we face. We cannot overcome the great challenges that exist for us, for our families, for our kids, for those who we care about, unless we come together and stand united. Stand united. And this is what really brings us all together here today, because we're concerned about the direction that our country's headed and what kind of future that we're leaving behind. Towards the end of the conference today, there was somebody who was leading kind of a focus group with the whole crowd there, and they asked the whole crowd, how many of you, and I'll ask you, how many of you feel that you are better off today than your parents? Than your parents were. You have more opportunities, maybe a better quality of life. And now how many of you believe that your children will be better off than you are today? A few of you. This was a similar response that we got earlier today in this crowd. There were a few people who felt like, okay, my kids will have more opportunities, but the vast majority of people really felt disheartened and less hopeful about the future. And this is why the choices that we have as voters are so important, because we get to set the direction for the leadership of our country. I think we often forget that sometimes, that it's we the people who get to hire or fire those who we elect into office, not the other way around, that we the people are the ones who really are the only people who have the power to be able to bring to fruition the vision that Abraham Lincoln had for us when he talked about a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. This is something that we don't have. The only way that we accomplish this is by gathering here in rooms like this, coming together, standing together as Americans to bring about this mandate, to bring about this change. Or we have leaders who are actually fighting for us. Not the government of, by, and for the rich and powerful that we have now, but really the government of, by, and for the people that we, the people, need and deserve. That's really what's at the core of our campaign. It's why I'm running for president. To be able to bring people together, to bring about the unifying kind of leadership that we need, to lead with aloha, treating each other with respect. Not looking out across the country and saying, well, you know what, I'm just going to hang out with Democrats and I'm only going to listen to Democrats because, you know, they're my tribe. No, I'm asking to serve all Americans. Looking out and not seeing deplorables, but seeing fellow Americans. The first week in office as president, I'll call for a meeting with Democrat and Republican leaders in the House and the Senate to begin the conversation, to begin that outreach based on respect, based on aloha. Just as I experienced in Congress, reaching out, building relationships, people on both sides of the aisle based on respect, understanding, hey, we may disagree, maybe on a few things, maybe on a whole lot of things. But if we can lay that foundation of respect and aloha, actually communicate, which is what? It's two things, requires two things, right? It's being able to accurately and clearly communicate your own thoughts, opinions, ideas. Just as importantly, it's about listening. There's not a whole lot of listening going on these days. You can't communicate if you don't have respect. Setting that foundation from the beginning and then having meetings at least once a month to be able to continue this dialogue is what I will do as president, because it is what's necessary for us to actually be able to work together to solve the problems that we face. Now, I've got a lot of ideas and I've got some plans about how I think we can address the many challenges that we face. You hear a lot of plans coming from other candidates who are running for president, but it's important to remember that plans really are only good if you're able to execute them. If you're able to work with Congress to get them passed into law. We don't have a country where the president can act unilaterally, right? You got to work with Congress to pass legislation. I know this is forgotten sometimes, Civics 101, but because it's forgotten, I think it's important to reiterate it. Now, we never know which way the political winds will blow. People say, oh, well, I'll be able to get my agenda passed because we're going to get more Democrats elected. Fine, but what about the other part of the country? About people from the other political party? The political winds blow left and right, back and forth. In order to make the lasting change we need to see, that's not going to be undone the next time the political winds blow in the other direction, it requires us to come together and work together. Nobody's ever going to get everything that you want, but we can and we will make progress if we can accomplish that. There's a number of different examples that I can point to of how this is possible, because it's hard to see that it's possible in this age of gridlock in Congress. But one of the most recent victories that we've seen is criminal justice reform. There was a piece of legislation passed not too long ago called the First Step Act that made an incredible impact on prison reform, on reducing high recidivism rates. There are thousands of people who had served their time who were actually able to be released from prison earlier than expected because of credits and other things that were included in this legislation, who are back home with their families today because of this legislation. There is a significant amount of money that's being saved, taxpayer dollars that are being saved because of the changes that are being made here to reduce recidivism rates, so you don't see the same people going over and over and over back through our criminal justice system. It didn't accomplish everything that we had wanted to accomplish, but it was an important first step to be able to make it so that we can build off of that and pass the Second Step Act, and so on and so forth. I think there are many other issues like this where there's great opportunity if we're willing to put the hyper-partisanship aside, come together as Americans to get the job done. Get the job done. As president, this will be my focus, to bring the values of service above self to the presidency. Service to the American people, service to our country. Reinstilling those principles of honor and respect and integrity to the presidency, so that all Americans can look towards our White House and know that that White House is a beacon of light and hope and opportunity for every single one of us. Thank you for being here tonight. I want to ask you to join me in this effort so that we can really bring about the kind of change that we need to see for the people. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. We will open it up for questions or thoughts. Yes, sir, we'll start with you.
Tulsi, I had to be the first person here. I have to tell you, I've gone to a lot of these. I'm a Trump supporter, by the way, and nothing will waive.
I'm glad you're here.
But I do listen to the other side. And I can tell you, you're the first one that didn't want to make me jump out of my skull, because I'm telling you, negativity is what they're preaching. And you didn't do that here. You didn't even mention President Trump's name, which is fine with me, but I'm just saying the last place I was terrible. Now, what are some of the things I want to talk about? something that's most important to me, some ties that we have. I want to ask you a question. Do you know who the first Senate President of the state of Hawaii was?
Was it Hiram Fong?
No. Senator Doc Hill mean anything to you? That's my grandfather.
No kidding.
Yeah, yeah. Very
Your
proud
roots
of that.
run deep.
Very much so.
Have you been there?
I've been to Hawaii back when I was 13.
Oh, wow.
There's another story.
Is this your wife?
It is.
You
She
guys
is.
should go. Make it go.
We are.
Okay,
My
good. In
son's
April.
getting married.
Good.
There's something really important, damn.
Here, I'll make a comment, and then if you remember it in a sec,
We'll continue. Look, there's a reason why I didn't bring up President Trump, because what we're talking about runs much deeper than my disagreements with his policies in this administration. If we look at the root cause of so many of the challenges that we face, whether it has to do with foreign policy, which we'll get to, healthcare, infrastructure, criminal justice reform, education, you can go down the list of Social Security, go down the list of issues and challenges that we face. These are not all things that began the day Donald Trump got elected or the day he was sworn into office.
We would be there if it wasn't for the impeachment hoax and all this other garbage going on.
We would be where?
We would have cheaper prescriptions.
I disagree. I think this is an area ripe for opportunity in getting bipartisan support. I think that the fact that President Trump and Nancy Pelosi are working together on bringing down prescription drug prices is a positive thing. But I'm talking about what brought us to this point. And this is a deeper systemic issue of essentially corruption within our own government, where you have, like I said, a government of, by, and for the very few rich and powerful who have such great influence over Washington that it spans across both political parties, where you have more people, unfortunately, both politicians as well as bureaucrats and people in positions of power who are more interested in serving those special interests, high-powered lobbyists and others, more than they're interested in actually serving the people who our government is supposed to be focused on serving one-pointedly. That's the change that I'm interested in seeing. Obviously, I'm running for president to defeat Donald Trump, with all due respect, but I think it's important for us all to recognize that is not the goal. That alone is not the goal. I said these comments in the last debate that we had. Yes, I plan on defeating Donald Trump if I'm the Democratic nominee, but this is bigger than that. This is about defeating the corrosive and corruptive influences in our government that have caused such great pain, suffering, and challenge for all Americans in this country. Bringing people together, healing these divides so that we together can move forward.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I like what you're saying about public service, but personally, I support Convention of the States because we need term limits in Washington, D.C. Where do you stand on Convention of the States and term limits? What's your feeling about term limits?
Yeah, are you meaning like a constitutional type of convention?
Right. Well, Convention of the States, if it takes place, it's provided under Article 5.
Yeah.
It's provided if 34 states
Correct.
agree to them.
Right.
And we could have as our platform term limits, and it would be done, and there would be nothing the Supreme Court or the Congress could do if 38 states passed that.
Yeah.
So that, to me, that is why I'm interested in it, because we need term limits. These people will never vote themselves out.
Yeah.
And the corruption stems from that fact, a large part of it, and
Yeah.
plus immorality.
Yeah. I think it's if we're able to get that consensus amongst the number of states needed, then I think that it's a positive thing. Getting people more involved in the process. I think this debate about term limits should be had in the country. How long should they be? Those are the kinds of things that need to be worked out. The thing that I caution against is I have seen in at least 1 or 2 states that has implemented term limits that have been too short for their state elected officials. They've seen an unintended negative consequence where I think it's like 1 or 2 terms for a state legislator the state legislator does not have the time to learn the process to be effective, and therefore they lean very heavily on their chiefs of staff or the staff who actually stick around as that high turnover occurs. And unfortunately what happens then is the lobbyists there at the state level will go and talk to and influence the chief of staff or the staff in order for them to tell, hey, here's the background on this issue, here's the way that we think you should vote. So the accountability, the lack of accountability that goes to those who are not elected officials is an unintended negative consequence that I think we should protect against. And I think that really just goes to a factor of timing so that you're not ending up in that situation. I think that a convention of the states is also a way to deal with things like Citizens United. Because the incumbency alone, basically what does the incumbency give a candidate? They are deeply entrenched in Washington, and for a lot of them, they're most dependent on lobbyist and PAC contributions to fund and fuel their campaigns, more so than they are, you know, small dollar grass, those who are given $5, $10, $15 a month or whatever people can give. So then you look at, okay, well, where are they, who are they spending their time with, and who are they listening to as they're making decisions on these policies? What to speak of the dark money that comes through Citizens United. So this is another place where I know folks are organizing, trying to build that consensus in enough states to overturn Citizens United and bring about some of the real campaign finance reform that we also need to see.
Sorry, thank you very much. I'm Scott Lively. I won't overset up why I'm asking this, just a quick question.
Sure.
I do have a real question.
Yeah.
I'm a Republican, lifelonger, from Arizona originally. I live in Martha's Vineyard. I consider myself fortunate, beyond blessed. I did vote for Trump. I'm actually proud that you voted for the impeach because I believe the same thing. Let's find the facts. Let's find out what the real story is. And if it's a hoax, great, we'll know it. If it's not, let's look further. My question is, and as a lifelong Republican, I mean, I worked for McCain, 92, Bush, Quayle, Arizona, I'm all in. I absolutely would support you when you win the nomination. How do you avoid the temptation? How do you not end up like an Adam Schiff that's owned by defense contractors, Pelosi owned by banks? How will you avoid the temptation of the big money and still win?
Having a backbone and being deeply rooted in my convictions and who I serve. This runs deep for me, and appropriately we are here in a VFW. And I look back to, you know, the time during my first deployment to Iraq, 2005, height of the war. I served in a field medical unit. We're about 40 miles north of Baghdad. And the unity that we had amongst both all of the soldiers that were in our unit, as well as, you know, the soldiers, airmen, Marines, sailors, coasties, who were also based in that same camp. Didn't matter where we were from, didn't matter what party we belonged to, religion, all of these things. None of that mattered. We were there because we were serving our country. Take the politics out of it, right? All of us were there because we made a choice to serve our country. It has been because of those experiences I had through both of my deployments of seeing the terribly high human cost of war firsthand, seeing the cost and the consequences of the decisions made by politicians, many of whom are influenced by the military-industrial complex, that I ran for Congress so that I could be in a position to help influence and make the decisions about where and when our men and women in uniform are sent into harm's way. This is why I'm running for president, because I know how critical it is that we have a commander-in-chief who has experience and understanding in national security and foreign policy, and who's ready to walk in on day one and do that job, and who is not going to bend to the influence of the foreign policy establishment in Washington that has been represented by the Bush/Clinton legacy of foreign policy. And this is what you'll get. This is the honest to God truth. That if you elect someone who lacks the experience and depth and understanding on both national security and foreign policy, you will get someone who walks in, even with the best of intentions, into the Oval Office on day one, not knowing what to do in certain scenarios, maybe not even knowing the right questions to ask, and then listening to the very same people who cycle through Washington's think tanks and offices, who represent that destructive foreign policy of being the world's police and continuing to wage these wasteful, costly regime change wars in other parts of the world. What to speak of the cost and the impact that it's had on our troops and on every one of us as taxpayers. I mean, this is what sets me apart from the other candidates running for president. This is not a game, it's not a career. I've never had any ambition to be president. I am in this because I'm fighting for our future, for our country. Thank you.
Okay, I'm representing AARP, Stop the Greed of Prescription
Yes.
Drugs. As president, you said right now Trump and Nancy are talking. So as president, what steps would you take first to push them to get something done?
Well, I would start by doing exactly what I said. We've got to start by having this dialogue and conversation. Because if you have leaders who are just talking at each other, whether it's through tweets or through dueling news interviews or through proxies, then you're not actually going to be able to find agreement, work out areas of disagreement, unless you're actually sitting together, looking each other in the eye and saying, all right, you know, we may have disagreements in these areas, but our interest is really in making sure that the American people, you're able to get the medicine that you need and you're able to afford it. This is something that can and should happen right now. Finding agreement on things like making sure that Medicare can negotiate lower prescription drug prices. This should have happened a long time ago. There's bipartisan support for this. It should happen right now. Reforms to the patent laws that right now are being exploited by big pharmaceutical companies so that they're able to continue to extend and extend and extend and extend their patents, blocking the generic drug companies from being able to produce those same drugs at a cheaper price. Doing things like allowing for the reimportation of these drugs from places like Canada. These are things that unfortunately families are being forced to do now because they can't afford the insulin for their child who has diabetes. I just was with someone earlier today here in Laconia who was talking about a friend that he went to school with who actually went blind for 6 months because he was rationing out his insulin because he couldn't actually afford to get the amount that he needed. We can't make progress unless we have dialogue. The culture of leadership that I'll bring as president will enable us to be able to have this roundtable with Democrat and Republican leaders who can then stay focused on doing what's in the best interest of the people. This is the most important first step. I think there are a number of things that we need to do. We need to follow on the great work that the AARP is doing in a nonpartisan way all across the country, spreading this message, stop the greed, cut prescription drug prices. These are the kinds of grassroots movements that have the ability to influence your elected leaders to turn their backs on the money coming from big pharma and actually say, hey, let's set aside our hyper-partisanship and let's do the right thing.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Well, hello, Tulsi. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And I like that you have president written on your posters. I'm Harry Mitchell. I live in Laconia. And I was a Vietnam veteran from
Thank you for your service.
65 to 69. One of my sons served in Iraq, and my other son is a chief in the United States Navy. My question to you is, what are we going to do in this country about abortions? Because thousands and thousands of babies are being killed by their own mothers every day.
Thank you for your service and the service of your family. There are a lot of things that I disagree with Hillary Clinton on, but one thing that I do agree with her on was the statement that she made when she said that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. this is oftentimes one of the most difficult decisions that any woman will make in her life. This is not a decision that I would make for myself. But I don't believe that our government or officials within our government should have the power to make this decision for any woman. This is something that she's got to do for herself. In line with the ruling that came from Roe v. Wade, I do think that there should be some restrictions. As I've said before, restrictions in the third trimester when a baby that's born in that time would be viable. Abortion should only be an option if the life of the mother is at stake or there are severe health consequences. As far as fulfilling safe, legal, and rare, I think that there's a lot that can and should be done to help provide for healthcare resources and information and other things so that more people can be prevented from being in that position of having to make that difficult choice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, welcome and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
In terms of people confessing, I was in journalism for 20 years, and I'm proud of what the news media has been doing in covering the past few years. My question is about your background, and I wondered, when you came to Congress, since you've been in Congress, what's been the most difficult vote that you've had to take?
That's a really good question. I don't know if this, I'd have to really give that some thought about the most difficult. I'll tell you, within my first year in Congress, I was faced with a difficult question I didn't expect would come so soon. I was sworn in January of 2013, and it was that summer that, I believe it was in August actually, that President Obama announced that he was going to come to Congress with a question about whether or not to launch a military attack against Syria. And you remember this? There was a red line that was drawn, and at first I think he said he was going to launch an attack, a military attack against Syria, and then later said that he would come to Congress for congressional approval. I'll never forget, I was pumping gas at the gas station near our house shortly after this news broke, and a woman just pulled over, and she came over and she grabbed my arm and she said, "Please, please, please don't allow them to start another war." I went on to hear from a lot of folks, both across my district in Hawaii and in other parts of the country, reflecting that similar message. They cut the Congress is usually in recess the month of August. They cut the recess short. We went back to Washington. We started to get briefings and get the information, both open briefings, classified briefings, so that we could best make the best decision based on the situation. And after gathering all the information, I came to the conclusion that launching a military attack against Syria, given their alliances within the region and elsewhere, would not be in the best interest of our country or our national security. And I was the first Democrat that came out publicly, first Democrat in Congress that came out publicly and said so, in disagreeing with what the president was proposing. I got a lot of backlash for that, saying, from the administration, phone calls saying, "Hey, look, you're from the president's home state of Hawaii, you're a Democrat, what are you doing?" I was speaking out for my brothers and sisters in uniform, and for the American people and for our national security, actually fulfilling the reason why I was running for Congress, why I ran for and got elected to Congress in the first place. Long story short, I think the rest of you know, that vote actually never ended up happening. I think there was a similar vote in the Parliament in the UK that was voted down, where they rejected that course of action. And if that vote had come to the House floor, I think it would also have been rejected. And President Obama went on to use diplomacy to try to get as many of the chemical weapons out of Syria as possible, and so on and so forth. I think he exercised a lot of courage in not unilaterally moving forward with that military attack. Thanks. Yes, sir. That's you?
As president, how would you help to keep our schools safe from gun violence?
Thank you. It's heartbreaking that this is a question that comes up as often as it does, especially when we have kids who come out to our town halls who are asking this question. I saw recently an advertisement for like an elementary school kid backpack that's bulletproof. That these are the kinds of things that people are now having to think about, both kids and their parents and loved ones, about how to best protect their kids. First thing, this is a big topic that there's no easy answer or solution to. I recently introduced legislation in Congress that seeks to gather the data and information from all of the different school shootings that we have seen occurring, so that we can start to look at, hey, what are the early flags that we hope people would have seen earlier. If you've got a kid who's in a state of serious distress or in need of help, or who's dealing with other issues that eventually leads them to taking this action, maybe there's something that we could have done sooner to actually help prevent this. What we found as we were trying to answer this same question is that there really was no collection of information, or no answers to these questions that we were seeking about what specific actions could have been done, especially specifically within our schools, to prevent these kinds of tragedies from occurring. So that's legislation that we've introduced to begin this process, so that we can make fact-based decisions about how best to protect our kids. Look, I think there's common sense, bipartisan legislation, some of which we've passed through the House of Representatives, that's sitting before the Senate now, to do things like make sure that we have universal background checks, to close some of the loopholes that have been exploited, unfortunately, where guns have gotten in the hands of those who have sought to do harm to others. I think these are common sense things that can and should have happened a long time ago. I think when people are polled on these examples that I'm talking about, most people think that they've already been passed into law and support it. That's not the case. The real deeper issue, I think, yes, it has to do with how we as a society can help make sure that guns are not getting into the hands of the very few who seek to do harm to others, while still respecting every American's Second Amendment rights. But there are also other issues about us as a society in how have we got to a point where we're seeing more and more school shootings, where in cities like Chicago, a friend of mine who's a congresswoman there, she speaks out loudly about the kids who are shot as they're walking to school in the mornings, but whose names are never in the headlines. Their stories are never told. About gang violence and other issues that are also taking the lives of the innocent. These are deeper issues that we as a society need to come together to confront and address. None of this can happen so long as this issue continues to be a divisive one, where you have people in one camp, others on the opposite side, and both screaming at each other, but no one really listening, so that we can get to the root cause and help to save people's lives.
Aloha, Tulsi,
Aloha.
namaste.
Namaste.
I am actually here on behalf of my libertarian friends
Okay.
and myself. It's an honor to talk to the next Democratic candidate or nominee for president.
Thank you.
So our concern, I don't know if you've spoken with a lot of libertarians, and I was a little bit dismayed tonight because I've only heard mention of the two sides, which we call the duopoly, which we think
Fair
are
enough.
two sides of the same coin. And so for us, we feel that there should be other voices, third voices that can come out, and I do think that the CPD has obstructed those third voices. Also, libertarians, we consider the Second Amendment sacrosanct. I am actually a daughter of the Revolution. My great-grandfather 13 times over fought in the Battle of Saratoga. It is instilled in me to be able to defend myself against an unjust or tyrannical government. In a poll, the ABC News Washington Post poll, it did show that anywhere between 9 to 44% of those polled opposed certain aspects of gun control. I went ahead and kind of looked at that, took those percentages compared to the entire population of the United States, and that comes to between 29 to 144 million people who oppose it in one way or another. I'd like to go ahead and just offer that it's not because we do not care about the children. We don't care. It's not that we don't. What we really focus on is individual liberty, and we want to have the ability to defend ourselves against a government that may become oppressive. You know, so, and libertarians, we're not here to fight, we're actually for peace. I just want to let you know we commend you for meeting with Assad. We commend you for your non-interventionism. We also commend you for recently speaking out about 9/11 and looking at Saudi Arabia's role in that. Okay? So we follow you very closely. I'm really happy that I was able to see you. I drove an hour and a half to see you.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to express, though, that we are actually a constitutional republic. We are not a pure democracy. So for those of us, for that 29 to 114 million, what can you do as president to help us feel that we are also being represented, that all the people are being represented? We're willing and able to come for solutions. We want to talk. We libertarians, honestly, we've been kind of watching this thing going back and forth, okay? And you know, we'll call out both sides. We've been wanting to have, you know, dialogue. We want people to come to the table, but it's just so volatile out there right now. I just wanted to express our appreciation.
Thank you.
And just request, hopefully, that you might be able to mention third parties a little bit as a possible, you know, solution. But I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, I'd love to make a few comments in response. I appreciate that you came here and that you're bringing voice to a lot of other folks. And we do. We've got libertarians that come to every single one of our events, anywhere we are in the country. So you are well represented. I think part of the challenge and the problem that we are seeing with the hyperpartisanship is the outsized amount of power that the political leadership in both parties has. And this makes it very difficult for a viable third party to exist, frankly. It's very hard to compete, just at a very practical level. But I think I've seen the impact that it has on a day-to-day basis, again, at a practical level in Washington. What does that mean when you have virtually unlimited amounts of money that, you know, if you're a multimillionaire, you could give millions of dollars to one political party or another. Whereas for a candidate, the contribution limits are $2,800 per election. Pretty huge disparity there between the two. So what result does that have? It has, again, incredible amount of power and leverage that the party leadership has to then hold over candidates within their own parties. And I've seen this happen in real time on the House floor, where there's an important issue or a big vote coming up, and those who are thinking about voting against the way their party is asking them to vote are almost bullied and saying, hey, look, if you vote against this or if you vote for this, there will be consequences. When you need our help, we will not be there for you. This is unfortunately having an impact on people's responsibility that they have to their constituents of actually thinking about, what's in their conscience about what's actually in the best interest. Is this legislation going to help people or hurt people? Then they're starting to think, oh, well, gosh, now let me think about my reelection and how is this going to have an impact on that? And are they going to be there to help me? Are they going to have my back? All of these other things that really should not be a part of that thought process that any elected leader has. That thought process should consist of one thing and one thing only. Am I voting to help improve the quality of life, helping serve the well-being of the people who I represent, the people of our country, or not? That should be the driving motivation. Unfortunately, that's really not what we have. That's what drives this hyper-partisanship. People are thinking only about the next election and who gets more power, rather than actually saying, hey, represent your constituents, do what you believe is right. I may disagree with that. I may disagree with your vote or your approach, but you have to do what you believe is the right thing to do. I hold our freedoms dear. Every event that we have, you may have noticed as you came in here, we have free pocket-sized copies of the Constitution and Bill of Rights that we hand out to everybody, because I think it's important for us to remember what those mean. Where you're raising concerns about the Second Amendment, often I talk about concerns with regards to the First Amendment that are constantly and consistently under threat. Where in this culture that we exist in today, there's this cancel culture, where if you're saying something that I find to be offensive or that I disagree with, then as the kids say on Twitter, delete your account. Silence. What kind of society do we live in today that does not encourage dialogue, debate, dissent, protest, agreeing, disagreeing with your elected leaders and in our government? That's not a reflection of how our country was founded. We may disagree on the details, but the way that I view our Constitution, Bill of Rights, specifically the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, just as with the First Amendment, it is not completely unlimited, that there is an exception there that exists for the safety and well-being of people. Similarly, with the Second Amendment, I agree with what you said. I think that there has to be some common sense regulations in place to make it so that the safety and well-being of people are not harmed, which is what occurs when you have folks who seek to do harm to others are able to go in and legally purchase a gun. That's the concern that I have.
Okay, let me ask you this. Why should one bad actor take my freedom away from having a gun? No matter if it's an AR-15 or whatever. I find it appalling. Now, you got libertarians to believe what I believe, but the Democrats are going, hell no, we're going to take our guns or whatever. Hell yes, rather. That was my answer. He's not in it. But the point is, all of them believe what Beto said. They're just not saying it now.
I don't.
Well, I know. That's why I'm sitting here. But listening. I mean, like I said.
Well, just like, I think it's dangerous for us to cast a broad brush and say you, because you're a Republican, vote the same way, or you believe the things that all Republicans believe, or whatever I believe Republicans believe. Every one of us is different. So I think it's important just to recognize that. Look, again, we can agree to disagree on this, but even as you look at a well-regulated militia, it's not an unregulated militia. That's not what the Constitution says. It talks about a well-regulated militia. Just like our First Amendment rights are not completely unlimited, there's a caveat for the safety and well-being of people. I believe the same applies for our Second Amendment rights as well. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Aloha. Nice to see you.
Good to see you again.
There you go.
And this is a great venue.
It is.
A great venue.
It's awesome.
You've been in the news in a lot of different ways lately.
Yeah.
From
you
not
noticed.
just what you're doing, but other people's opinions. Mm-hmm. And I think it's all in line with the range of people we have here: libertarians, Republicans, independents, all kinds of people coming here. And I think it's all in line with this idea that your whole background politically, not being afraid to speak up when you disagree on matters of principle and integrity, including within your own party. And I think we've seen how the sad reaction and this kind of pushback. But this is not so much a question, but just to let you know, I talk to a lot of people and I'm in communication with a lot of people, and I think by and large this has helped you. It has raised your visibility. If you're on that kind of a list, on certain people's target list, I think that speaks a lot. Yeah, and a lot of people are, you know what a lot of people are saying? They're saying all the way through the primaries, all the way to the convention, all the way to the election. Don't stop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I won't. I won't.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Bob White. I live in Samerton, and I've seen you on Tucker Carlson about 4 or 5 times, and I'm wondering if there are any repercussions you have felt as a result of speaking out what you're saying tonight on that show.
Bill, you said your name was Bill? Bob. Thank you very much, and thank you for your service. Yeah, a little bit. There are those, who'll drop comments on my social media pages, or people who won't say something to my face but feel very free to say very nasty things on Twitter, who criticize me for going on Fox News and specifically going on Tucker Carlson's show. My answer to them is I'm speaking to people at home. I'm running for president to serve all Americans, not just those who watch MSNBC or CNN. All Americans. And if I'm only willing to talk to people who live in certain places in the country, or who choose to get their media from certain sources but not others, then that would be a poor reflection on the kind of president that I would be. I'm interested in going and meeting people where they are, wherever they are. That includes on the media as well as in person. How I challenge those who levy this criticism against me is I ask them, are you actually listening to what I'm saying? Listen to the message that I'm delivering. It doesn't change whether I'm on one news show or another news show, or if I'm in one part of the country or another part of the country. My message has been incredibly consistent for as long as I've been campaigning for president, and it's reflected through the work that I've done in Congress. If we would listen more to the substance and the dialogue that's possible when we do that, then we would be able to cut out so much of the toxic, divisive noise that we hear of name calling and all of these other things that that are really unfortunate and extremely hurtful and undermining what I believe is the task before us, which is to come together as a country for our country and for each other.
Thank you. Yes.
First of all, thank you for being here today. My concern is Social Security. I think businesses are less likely to have pension plans anymore. How would you strengthen Social Security for the people? Because I think people are going to be more dependent on it, rather than less dependent on it in the future.
Yeah, I agree. You know what's interesting is I was in a relatively small town in Iowa called Grinnell not too long ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, and we were having a town hall similar to this there, and it's a college town. There's a university there. There was a young college student there. I asked him how old he was. I think he said he was 18 or 19. But the number one issue on his mind was Social Security. He said in the microphone, he said, you all might think I'm crazy for actually thinking about this right now, but I'm worried about whether or not Social Security will be there for me when I grow up. And it's a valid worry given the trend that we have seen in the Social Security fund being raided time and time and time again to pay for other things in our government that have nothing to do with strengthening or expanding Social Security. So to me, that's the number one change that I'd make as president, to work to pass a law that would prohibit the raiding of Social Security fund for any other purpose. Because that's a fund that every one of us is paid into throughout our lives. It's not an entitlement, as some would say. This is a benefit that every one of us has contributed to and earned throughout our lives. I think that how do we expand it? Because we're seeing how even as the cost of living in so many states has continued to rise, rising cost of healthcare, rising cost of housing, all these other things that are contributing to the rising cost of living, increases in Social Security have been marginal at best, not anywhere near keeping up with inflation, and things cost more. So we've got to be able to expand it, both for Social Security beneficiaries as well as those who are relying on SSI and disability. I think that a relatively simple way to do that would be lifting the cap on those who pay in to Social Security. That would provide for those who are making a lot more to be able to contribute more to this.
Thank you. We're running low on time, so I think we've got to
Okay,
wrap it
well,
up.
we'll take the last one here in the back. Yes, sir.
Yes, you.
Make it good. Make it good.
Okay, so no pressure, right? So over the last week or so, Donald Trump did something very blatant, I think, in Syria, announcing that he was going to send troops to protect and potentially fight for Syrian oil. And the refreshing thing is that he was honest about it, but I would have thought that that would have created quite a brouhaha, you know, just for him to talk about doing something is, anyway, I just was hoping that you'd kind of give us your take
Sure.
on what's going on.
Sure, yeah, I have some thoughts. There is legislation that I've introduced, actually, and that I'm working on getting a strong partner in the U.S. Senate to introduce in the Senate side as well, that deals with this very issue. How many of you know what he's talking about? Let me just start there. Okay, wow, almost all of you. Awesome. Both President Trump's statements confirmed by Secretary of Defense Mark Esper confirmed that his intent is to deploy U.S. troops to protect Syrian oil that does not belong to us. And President Trump talked about, yeah, we'll take some for ourselves and maybe send an ExxonMobil to manage that for us. Secretary Esper, when asked, he confirmed that this was the case. And when asked, well, you're going to fight to protect this oil even from the Syrians and the Russians? And he said, yes. To be clear, we're talking about resources, oil that does not belong to the United States. It's Syrian oil. It belongs to Syrian people. Number one, it is a disservice to our troops to dishonor them by sending them on a mission that has nothing to do with our national security. This is about oil. Number two, Congress has not authorized this. Our troops have been in Syria under the authorization of Congress that was passed shortly after 9/11 to defeat Al-Qaeda and its affiliates and offshoots like ISIS. Doesn't matter what they say. You know, they said, oh, they want to protect this oil from ISIS. But that follow-up question to Secretary Esper, he said, well, actually, yeah, well, we're gonna keep this oil from the Syrians who actually own the oil and the Russians so that we can make sure that we give the money to the Syrian Kurds so that they can buy more vehicles and weapons to fight ISIS. They're being very, as you said, being very blatant and transparent about their purpose. The problem is it's illegal and unconstitutional. The last thing I'll say on this is it is yet the latest move, it's yet the latest piece of evidence that this regime change effort that's been ongoing in Syria since 2011 is continuing. And the tactics that have been used in this regime change effort in Syria have primarily consisted of two things. One is waging a proxy war. Maybe not having our troops do it directly, but providing arms and equipment to terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and others affiliated with them, because they are the most powerful ground fighting force to be able to then go and overthrow the Syrian government. This has been happening. Previous administration and this one. Number two, waging what is essentially a modern day siege through draconian sanctions that are ongoing. And this stealing of Syrian oil is yet the latest move in this modern day siege, which ultimately is hurting the Syrian people most. People who are having a hard time getting access to basic energy so that they can have heat during the winter, blocking them from getting the kinds of basic food, water, and medicines that they need to survive, and blocking them from being able to start the heavy process of beginning to rebuild their own country. The Syrian people are the ones, especially the most vulnerable, the elderly and the children who are being harmed the most. Yet again, why I keep calling for an end to being the world's police, calling for an end to these continuous regime change efforts and wars with whatever tactics are being used.
You okay?
Stay tuned. We'll be announcing, we're getting a strong partner in the Senate, and we'll be announcing it very soon. Thanks. Thank you. I'm sorry we're out of time. I'm glad we got to as many questions as we could. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for spending your time here this evening. Thank you for the great responsibility that you have and the choices that you have before you. I know you don't take it lightly. If you like what you heard this evening and you want to be helpful, we need your help. We are a fully people-powered campaign. We take no PAC or lobbyist contributions, and we're getting close. I think we're at about 100 days before the voting begins here in New Hampshire. I'm going to pass the mic off to Nitya, and she's going to share a little bit about how you can be helpful.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I spoke for a moment earlier. And thank you for coming tonight. We all came here to learn more about Tulsi, and we want to be with you on your journey towards Election Day. Sorry, this is my first time doing this. Forgive me if I stumble. So I'm a volunteer on the campaign, and actually Tulsi is my congresswoman from Hawaii. I was there when she announced, and I didn't go there thinking, oh, I'm gonna really go out and support this lady for the rest of the year. But here I am in New Hampshire, and people have asked me, like, how are you finding the cold? It is very cold already. That's what I've heard. But, you know, I would not give this up for anything. The cold is just a little thing on the side that's a little worry compared to the, you know, enormous thing we're doing here. So I wanted to offer everyone a chance today. We have these cards. They are called Tulsi Can Count on Me, and it takes 1 minute to fill out. It just has some simple ideas of something you could do. Talk to some friends, invite Tulsi to come to your home, have a coffee and toffee with Tulsi. You know, we want everyone to join our movement, become co-leaders in change makers in our society, because what Tulsi is saying, spreading this aloha, her message, it is so important. And I hope everyone like me sees that, or, you know, just tell your friend about it. Call someone up tonight and be like, hey, I went to a Tulsi event. It was really interesting, but awesome. And, you know, if you have any questions, we'll be back there. We have volunteers around the room with clipboards, and they'll come pass them out to you. If anybody who would like to join us would like to raise their hand, and people will come bring you a pen and one of these cards, and on your way out, if you drop it off at the table, that would be awesome. Any hands up? Yay, 1, 2, okay. Thank you so much.
Good job, Nitya. Give her a round of applause. Good job, good job. First of many.
All right, thank you again all so much for coming.
How are you? Thank you for coming tonight. Good talking to you.
John Wayne was also married